Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Berechot, chapter 3, Halacha 1. This is part 3 on the shiur. Before we were talking about honoring the dead, and now we're going to get into a case about a Goan who has to leave the land of Israel and maybe do something over in the land of Israel, outside of the land of Israel. We know that the lands outside of Israel convey tuma, but that's tuma de Rabbanan. And then the question is going to be about if he's going to be allowed to go there and then study the Torah. And what better thing is there than to give honor to the Torah? But on the other hand, we also know that we have to give honor to all the Torah laws, and a Goan is not allowed to make himself tameh. So what do we do here? And how is that going to work? And what about doing other mitzvahs, like what about getting married, and all these other things about honoring things, right? So we're going to be getting into, we have been getting into honoring a corpse, but what about when it is, in comparison with these other things? And so we're going to get into it by talking about tameh and tahor with a Goan, and what's he allowed to do for contamination on it. Is he allowed to or not? It's actually a very interesting topic, and you can see a lot of detail in here. For instance, when it says, that you're supposed to live in the land, how valuable is that? So then, going outside of the land, what is that going to mean? So there's a brisa that taught that a Goan may contaminate himself by going outside the land of Eretz Yisrael for the sake of adjudicating monetary cases or cases involving capital punishment, for the sake of sanctifying the new month, for the sake of intercalculating an extra month into the year, and to rescue a field from the hands of a marauding Gentile, even if he merely wishes to protect his field from being appropriated by a Gentile in the future. It says that he may go out of Eretz Yisrael to defend his rights in it before a secular court. He may also leave Eretz Yisrael to study Torah or to marry a wife. And Rabbi Yehuda says if he has a place within Eretz Yisrael where he can study Torah, he may not contaminate himself with the tumah of foreign lands simply because he prefers to study elsewhere. So I want to talk about what is this with intercalculating the months for a second. So you have a system where there's it comes out for the lunar calendar to be something like 29 and a half days. And if you go through the lunar calendar, it comes out to 354 days when you add it up. And we know that in the solar calendar, it's 365 and 1/4 days. So if you don't adjust it about every 2 years, you end up, sometimes 3 years, but generally 2 or 3 years, you end up going backwards. Now the Torah, in Islam does go by the moon, but it doesn't make any kind of intercalculation. So that's why they can have, their holiday of Eid either be in the winter or be in the summer. Now the Torah, first of all, tells us that, we have to set the calendar and we have to calculate it. Torah also says that the month for Pesach always has to be in Nisan. It always has to be in the springtime. Okay, so we have a directive on when is Rosh Hashanah, and when does that have to be? When does Yom Kippur have to be? When does Pesach have to be? And we know that Shavuot, you count up the days, and that holiday has to be there. Okay, and then it also reinforces that by telling you the time of year that is, and then it reinforces it again by saying that you have to have it where, certain agricultural activities are taking place. So, for instance, how can you have Pesach if, it's too early to be growing any barley at all? Okay, you need the barley for the Omer. So what happens if you don't intercalculate it? And like the Muslims, the calendar falls back, and then it goes to December. Well, there's no barley growing in December. There's no barley growing in November from which is going to be like a new crop that you're going to harvest. So you can't do the holiday. The whole system of the Torah starts to fall apart. So what would happen is they would have for the sanctification of the new month and the intercalculation of the extra month in the year, they would send out messengers from Eretz Yisrael, from Jerusalem, where they calculated everything, to the outside communities, so everybody stayed on the same calendar. And what this is saying is that the Goan, if he's an agent to go and sanctify the months to the outside communities, or to tell them the time for the extra month of the year, that he may go outside and go do that. Very important to keep the time. Torah commands it. And it's critical because we have a command in the Torah to safeguard the holidays, and not just the ordinances, but the holidays as well, so that if we're not calculating and setting the time, you're going to end up with a big mess, and you'll end up like that situation that I just said, where in Pesach you can't do the Omer on the first day of Pesach, because if you fall behind by 3 months because you just didn't calculate it for 5 years, then you have a big mess because you're not doing what the Torah says. And we always have to do what the Torah says. So that's a big issue. And I want to also point out that for the calculation on the month and all of that, that a Jew is allowed to ride to go testify to the court even on Shabbat, and even go do all of that on Shabbat in order to do it. That's how important it is, because that's a positive commandment. It's a positive commandment to do that. And a positive commandment is that it's actively telling you to go do something is gonna outweigh a negative commandment. So it's a positive commandment to go and set the calendar. And if the Goan becomes tamei, and it's basically a passive thing, he didn't intentionally become tamei because he was trying to become tamei. He was actively doing a positive mitzvah, and in the process of doing that positive mitzvah, he became tamei, and that's why that's allowed. And what about the other cases about adjudicating a monetary case or something like that? And we know that the adjudication and capital cases is an imperative that's also set forth in Devarim in 16:18 and in Numbers 35:24. So if he's a judge, it says, you shall judge, right? So if he's actively going to judge and he passively becomes tamei in the process of doing the active mitzvah to go and judge, then that's what it's talking about. And about rescuing a field, in this case, the rabbis permitted the Goan, in this case a Goan, to travel to foreign lands to go and litigate, property in a non-Jewish court, because what's happening is, he is sustaining. He's first of all helping a Jew, and the idea about a Goan leaving Eretz Yisrael to restore his property that is even outside of the land is going to be considered a potential monetary loss. So it would be that if you had a Goan that could leave Eretz Yisrael for the sake of earning a livelihood, that would be a big question if it's just for earning a livelihood. But this is for rescuing a piece of land. It looks like it's land that he has, not necessarily the land of other people, of other Jews, but you have to get more clarification on that. And the other thing is that he's allowed to go outside of Eretz Yisrael to defend grievances that are filed in a non-Jewish court. And even if he was trying to repossess a field, and even if he was, thinking that he's not going to have a chance to do it, he's still allowed to go and try in the court. And another thing is that, you're not allowed to just, go outside and contaminate yourself just because. So what about for learning Torah? Or what about for marrying? The Torah says that you're supposed to, get married, and Jewish men are supposed to marry Jewish women. So, if there's a shidduch over there, is he allowed to go do it? And because again, you're taking the active performance of a positive mitzvah, and in consequence, you became tamei. What about Torah? So, what Rabbi Yudah is pointing out is that if he has Torah to study in Eretz Yisrael, that he has to stay in Eretz Yisrael to do it. But if he doesn't have Torah out in Eretz Yisrael to study, he can go out there. Now, that's going to have a lot of asterisks and a lot of caveats on that. And you can't just go. It's only if there's not a suitable teacher locally would he be allowed to leave. So that's a big point. So you had periods of time when Torah learning was elsewhere and the land became depopulated. So you could be talking about a case like that where, after, the year, say 500, or about 550, Torah learning was in Bavel. And if you were one of the few people that were living in Eretz Yisrael, and a lot of the scholarship had already moved, and there was a lot of destruction of land by the Romans, then, it's talking about a case like that. In a day like today, you have to ask the posek, because there's a lot of opinions on that. The Gemara is going to continue. Says that Rabbi Yossi says that even if he has a place within Eretz Yisrael where he can study Torah, he may contaminate himself by traveling outside the land if he feels that he will be more successful studying Torah under a different teacher. And the Gemara says, because not from everyone does a person merit to learn. Indeed, they said about Yosef the Cohen that he contaminated himself with the tumah of foreign lands by following his teacher outside of Eretz Yisrael to the city of Sidon, even though there were other teachers available in Eretz Yisrael. So this is a case about somebody who was already attached to a teacher already, and he followed his teacher who moved. And it's also saying that, hey, if you're going to become more successful by moving to Lakewood and studying with a specific rabbi over in Lakewood, and you're a Cohen, and this is what Rabbi Yossi is pointing out, that you can do it because you're going to be more successful in Torah, and that's really going to be the point. And also point out that the tumah of foreign lands is tumah, but it's also a derabanan thing. So the Gemara is going to talk about, is going to continue about Yosef the Cohen, and the Gemara, I'm sorry, it's not going to talk about Yosef the Cohen. The point about Yosef the Cohen is that Sidon is not considered part of Eretz Yisrael, and it was not included in the original conquest in the days of Joshua, and it also wasn't in the days of Ezra. And so Sidon is going to be important in the future, but basically what this is showing is that the Kohen may expose himself to the tumah of foreign lands if it's necessary for the advancement of Torah learning or another purpose that's listed here. And, where the Bavli explicitly rejects the notion of a Kohen being allowed to expose himself to biblical corpse tumah, that's going to be another issue, right? So this right now is a Darabanan issue. The question is going to be about what about with biblical corpse tumah? Is that going to apply as well? And that's going to be a whole another set of issues. So there are Rishonim who maintain that that with regards to exposing yourself to biblical corpse tumah, there are some Rishonim who maintain that the Yerushalmi does entertain the possibility with respect to Torah study, but that's a lot of complication, and that's not so clear, and a lot of Rishonim don't hold that way. Some do. So the Gemara is going to continue and say that the Brisa concludes that Rabbi Yossi's leniency does not apply to a Kohen who wants to leave Eretz Yisrael in order to go marry. And the Gemara says that, but although the rabbi is allowed a Kohen to leave Eretz Yisrael for the perceived betterment of his Torah learning, with regards to marriage, they said a Kohen should not go outside of Eretz Yisrael for the purposes of marriage unless they have a guaranteed shidduch for him. So basically, unless you can point out and say that this is the specific woman, you're not allowed to go out and just start searching for a woman. That's the point. Now, the Haredim points out that a Kohen may not leave Eretz Yisrael until he has received a pledge, either in writing or through a messenger, that he may go and marry the proposed woman. Again, this is talking about a specific woman. And once that commitment has been made, says the Haredim, it is irrelevant whether there are other eligible women in Eretz Yisrael, for a man is entitled to marry the specific woman whom he finds most compatible. So the Gemara is going to present another question on this topic, and it's going to ask a question. It's going to say, may a Kohen become tamei with corpse tumah for the sake of delivering Birkat Kohanim? That's the blessing that the Kohanim give in the morning. So corpse tumah, this is going to be a Doraita type of tumah, and the Kohanim are required to bless the people. It says that in Numbers 6:22, and this blessing is a profound blessing where Hashem is blessing the Kohanim through the Kohanim to you. It's a very unusual blessing, and it's a very special blessing, and it's very deep metaphysical blessings when you really start, studying it. So the question is going to be that there's a positive commandment for them to go and make this blessing, to bless Eretz, Am Yisrael. Basically, the Gemara is wondering that, if you have a Kohen who's going to go enter the synagogue, and then there happens to be a corpse there, and he's doing it to go fulfill the mitzvah of doing the Birkat Kohanim, but also, you have this Doraita thing about the corpse, and the Kohanim is not allowed to contaminate himself normally with a corpse. So what's going to happen? And which is it going to be? Before we were just talking about a Darabanan thing, but what about with a Doraita thing? And by the way, this is not for going to learn Torah. This is to go do the blessing. So there's always a difference in learning Torah versus other things. And going and doing this blessing, is he going to be allowed to contaminate himself? That's the $1 million question. The Gemara is going to have a conversation about this issue. And it says that Magbila, the brother of Rabbi Abba Bar Kohen, said before Rabbi Yossi in the name of Rabbi Acha, a Kohen may become Tameh for the sake of delivering Birkat Kohanim. And Rabbi Acha heard what Magbila had reported in his name and said, I never told him anything of that sort. And he then said, in an attempt to explain the source of Magbila's error, and it said that perhaps he only heard from me that which Rabbi Yudon ben Pazi said in the name of Rabbi Elazar. Any Kohen who is standing in the synagogue and does not recite Birkat Kohanim when the time has come to do so transgresses a positive commandment. So there is a positive commandment, says the Pnei Moshe, in Numbers 6:23, and basically he's transgressing that commandment. Okay, so here, let me read that. It says, "Speak to Aaron and to his sons, saying, so shall you bless the children of Israel, saying to them, may Hashem bless you." Okay, so basically what this is saying is that the commandment is violated only if the Kohen is present in the synagogue when the prayer leader calls on the Kohanim to ascend. And there's no violation if the Kohen has already recited Birkat Kohanim once that day. So that's a key point. If you're a Kohen and you've already done it once, you're not obligated to keep doing it. And if you haven't done it and you continue not to do it, then you are transgressing a positive commandment. But if you've already done it once and then you choose not to do it a second time, then you didn't violate a commandment, because the praying is always concerned with the people's time and not to make it so that the people can't do other things in the day. That's why we can't take too long when you can't delay the congregation. And so if the Kohanim had to just keep doing it again and again and again and again, you're basically delaying the congregation. So it would become a burden, become very hard for a lot of the Kohanim to do it, and then they may not want to go do it at all. So again, it's limited to just one time. But if the Kohen decides to do it more than once, that's up to him. He's allowed to do it. And that's, of course, a mitzvah. But he doesn't have to do it. And I also want to point out another thing, that there's another concept in Birkat Kohanim, where it says in both Shas's, what happens if the people have to go out into the field for work? Do they get the benefit of having Birkat Kohanim, even if there's no Kohen there in the field to go do it? And the Gemara answers yes, and there's a lot of caveats to that. And the yes about that is if the Jew had prayed and there just hadn't been a Kohen in that shul, or if they were sincere about trying to do the avoda, and they were short on time, they couldn't wait for a Kohen, and they had to go to work and things like that. It's basically saying that the blessing from the Kohanim from somewhere else is still going to apply to that person. But if the person didn't want to get up and pray, and he didn't really feel like it, and he was late and things like that, then it doesn't apply to him. He doesn't get that blessing. And basically the point about that is that if the Kohen already did it one time and then he has to go to work, he's not messing up his obligation. He's already done it once. And this other person who now doesn't have a Kohen, he's getting this blessing from the Kohanim from another Kohen who's doing it somewhere else, just like the people in the field. So that's a key point. Now, the other key point is going to be about whether they're allowed to expose themselves to Tuma. Now, it's a principle in Judaism that when you have a positive commandment and then a negative commandment, and they come together, that the positive commandment is going to override the negative commandment. That is just everywhere. Okay, it's everywhere in the Shasas. And that's a core idea. Now, accordingly, in this case, Magbila might have assumed that the Kohen who is standing outside the synagogue when the time for Birkat Kohanim arrives should be allowed to enter, even if there's a corpse inside, because the mitzvah to recite the blessing supersedes the prohibition against becoming temeh. So I want to point out that it's kind of unclear why the prohibition should be overridden in this case, considering that the Kohen is standing outside the synagogue and has no obligation to participate in Birkat Kohanim, because again, he already did it once. So that's a technical question, and that's something that we have to try to figure out an explanation for why that could be. One possible reason why that could be would be that perhaps the Kohen under discussion was personally requested to enter and deliver the Birkat Kohanim, in which case he presumably is biblically obligated to comply. So that could be what's going on here. So the Gemara reads that, and Magbila therefore thought to say that the positive commandment to recite Birkat Kohanim overrides a prohibition forbidding a Kohen to expose himself to corpse tumah. I, however, have never explicitly told him anything about the matter, and he is in fact mistaken, and says, "Bring him here, and I will administer lashes to him for reporting this incorrect ruling in my name." So, it's a complicated story, and question is, did he violate something or not? And also, did Magbila end up saying an incorrect ruling? And then there's another relevant incident. It says that Rabbi Abahu was once sitting and teaching his students in the open courtyard of the great synagogue of Caesarea, and a corpse was there inside the synagogue building, and the time for reciting Birkat Kohanim arrived, but the Kohen among Rabbi Abahu's students did not even ask him whether they should enter the synagogue to participate, because they presumed that it was forbidden for them to do so, and eventually the time for eating arrived. So it's normal for Torah scholars to eat around noontime, and then that way they can go and have some food and then go and do mincha. This was in the day, because again, these people were getting up at nets and starting very early. So in this case, the Haredim says that Rabbi Abahu and his disciples would customarily pray at daybreak and then proceed to study in the unroofed courtyard of the synagogue. And the general public prayed in the synagogue at a later time, and when they would reach the point at which the Kohanim are called to bless the people, the Kohanim among Rabbi Abahu's students would enter the building to deliver the blessing and then return to their studies. On this particular day, says the Haredim, there was a corpse inside the synagogue during the prayer service. So basically, it's asking, what do you do here? So the Gemara continues, and it says that eventually the time for eating arrived. They asked Rabbi Abahu whether it was permissible for them to leave and thereby expose themselves to tumah. And he said to them, "With regards to Birkat Kohanim, you did not ask me whether it was permissible to contaminate yourselves, having concluding on your own that it was forbidden, and with regards to eating, why do you ask me?" So basically, they're saying that the students were correct in assuming that they should not contaminate themselves for the sake of reciting Birkat Kohanim. However, Rabbi Abahu was upset when it came to the performance of a mitzvah that the students did not bother investigating whether there was room to be lenient. And now that their meal was at stake, they were trying to find a leniency for it. So that's a technical point in this passage about Rabbi Abahu, that Rabbi Abahu was admonishing them and insinuating that, perhaps they were not permitted to remain in the building where they ate, and whereupon, it would seem that, why are they asking now when something that they have an interest in? So normally the corpse gets removed right away, and in this case, the corpse had not yet been removed from the synagogue. And in a situation, normally a Cohen is forbidden to leave or enter a courtyard until the corpse is carried out. And in this case, as a Haredim, Rabbi Bahu's students thought that it might be permissible for them to leave while their mealtime arrived, because the sages teach that one who has difficulty fasting but does so anyway is called a sinner. That's going to be in Bavli Tanis 11a, says Haredim. And alternatively, the incident may have taken place on Rosh Chodesh when it's proper to eat a generous meal, and the students were inquiring as to whether this mitzvah meal overrides the tumah prohibition. So there's a lot of possibility and flexibility on what's going on in the case, and it's kind of unclear, and that's what makes the Yerushalmi so difficult to study. But why we want to keep doing it, because it helps us to think about these matters in many more perspectives and hopefully learn more while doing it. The complexity itself hopefully helps us to learn more. The Gemara is going to go to a similar topic. Rabbi Yanai said, a Kohen may become tamei with corpse tumah in order to see the king. And that's an interesting one. So the Haredim says about that Yerushalmi accepts this qualification. And as for a Kohen, it is prohibited from exposing himself to the biblical tumah for the sake of fulfilling the scriptural commandment to recite Berechot Kohanim. So then he is certainly prohibited from doing so for the mere purpose of observing a king. So to go look at a king. So evidently the Gemara here is referring to rabbinic tumah from foreign lands. So the question here is, is he allowed to go and leave, to go into foreign lands to go see a king? Over here, it says that a Kohen may become tamei with corpse tumah in order to see a king. So, he's allowed to go into bless the congregation, presumably, assuming that he hasn't yet done so with Berechot Kohanim, and he even if he's going to come contaminated with corpse tumah, and so too over here, Rabbi Yanai is pointing out that a Kohen may also become tamei with corpse tumah in order to see a king. Now, there's a related incident when King Diocletian came up here to Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Chia bar Abba was seen treading upon the graves of Sur in order to see him. For indeed, Rabbi Hiskiah and Rabbi Yirmiyah, and in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, says, it is a mitzvah for a person to go and see the greats of royalty, so that when the Davidic kingdom returns in the Messianic era, he will know to differentiate between the extraordinary honor that will be bestowed upon the kingdom of Israel and the far lesser honor enjoyed nowadays by the pagan kingdoms. So the Rashi, and the parallel to this in the Bavli, Berechot Bavli 58a, says that by witnessing the honor accorded to kings in the present, one acquires a basis for contrasting their glory with that of the Messianic king, and he will then appreciate the great difference between the glory of those enjoying their rewards in the Messianic era and the current glory of the idol-worshipping nations. So the Gemara now is going to raise a question. It's going to say, may a Kohen become tamei for the honor of the departed Nasi? So the Nasi is literally the prince, and that's the head of the Sanhedrin, and he was the spiritual leader of the people. And the position of the Nasi was put in during the Second Temple era. And the question is okay, is a Kohen going to be allowed to become tamei, for his primary teacher who has died? Okay, and the answer is yes. Now, the question is going to be, well, what about whether a Nasi, and is he going to be like a teacher for the entire community? And Haredim is asking, and saying that, the Gemara is considering whether Nasi is a teacher for the entire community, and it permits even the Kohen to become Tamei for him, and that's another point by the Mara Fulda is that it could be that the Gemara is asking whether the importance of honoring the Nasi supersedes the Kohen's Tuma prohibition. That's another way to look at it. So the Gemara is going to cite two incidences that show that this is permitted. And the Gemara says that when Rabbi Yudan Nasi passed away, Rabbi Yanai issued a proclamation and said, there is no kahuna today, and that is the Kohanim, that the Kohanim may become Tamei for the purpose of according proper honor to the Nasi for his funeral. And the Gemara has another example and says, similarly, when Rabbi Yudah Nasiya, the grandson of Rabbi Yudah Nasiya, passed away, Rabbi Chia bar Abba pushed Rabbi Zera into the synagogue of the vineyard of Sipporin, where the body lay, and thereby contaminated Rabbi Zera with corpse tuma. So this is a case where Rabbi Chia bar Abba actually pushed him in, and the reason he pushed him in is he's trying to make it clear to everybody that this is permissible with the law. So you saw that a lot of times with Rebbe, that Rebbe would be doing work at a certain point of time so that people would know that work is kosher at that period of time, because you might have stringencies and people might not want to do it out of a humrah, but he would go ahead and do it so that you see that if people are choosing to do it, that is going to be a humrah. That's not necessarily the law. And this would be the case as well, that presumably Rabbi Zera would not want to do it. The reason Rabbi Chia bar Abba pushed him in and contaminated him with a corpse tuma is so that everybody could know that the halacha is that for the Nasi that you're allowed to do it. And here's another incident. It says that when Rabbi Nehorai, the brother of Rabbi Yudah Nasi, passed away, Rabbi Hanina sent for Rabbi Mana, who was a Kohen, to come and participate in the funeral. And the Gemara says that, but Rabbi Mana did not come, and he replied to Rabbi Hanina in explanation of his refusal, and it says that if during the lifetimes of Nasiim we, Kohanim, may not contaminate ourselves for them, then certainly it is prohibited for us to do so in their death. So Rabbi Mana holds the opinion of Rabbi Yudah, that a Kohen who is able to study Torah in Eretz Yisrael, says the Haredim may not contaminate himself with the tumah of foreign lands in order to study under his teacher. And says the Haredim, Rabbi Mana is arguing that it is prohibited for a Kohen to expose himself to rabbinic tumah for the sake of studying under his teachers who is alive, then surely it's prohibited to become biblically tamei for the honor of his teacher or a Nasi who's already passed away. So the Gemara is going to reject Rabbi Mana's reasoning and explain why it's permissible for a Kohen to contaminate himself for a Nasi who has just perished. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Nasa says that in their death, the Nasiim were given the status of an unattended corpse, for even Kohanim are allowed to become Tamei. So I want to point out what the Haredim says about this, that the Gemara defends Rabbi Hanina's position that Kohanim may become Tamei for the Nasi by asserting that any Nasi who dies is regarded as a met mitzvah, in other words, unattended corpse, and basically it's a mitzvah for everyone to go do. So although that there are surely many people attending to the Nasi, his honor is such that no matter how many people, there are never enough. So in this sense, the Nasi's body is always like unattended. That's the idea. And that's why it makes it permitted, says the Haredim, for Kohanim to participate in the burial rites, since the Torah permits and even obligates even the Kohen Gadol to attend to the body whose needs are not being met. So even the Kohen Gadol would have to become Tameh to go handle an unattended body, and that is in the Torah. So you don't get more authoritative than that. It's the word of God. So the Gemara proceeds to another issue and says that may a Kohen become Tameh by leaving Eretz Yisrael for the honor of his father or mother. That's I'm glad we bumped into this because, that's the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother. And what about that? Are you allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael to do that? And that, by the way, you have a positive one that, honor your mother and father. And that's going to be something that is a biblical Doraita thing. And then you have the corpse, the Tameh by leaving Eretz Yisrael, which is a Derabanan thing. Is that going to supersede it? So Gemara asks, may a Kohen become Tameh by leaving Eretz Yisrael for the honor of his father or mother? And the Gemara is going to answer by giving an incident that's similar and says, Rabbi Yasser, who was a Kohen, heard that his mother was traveling to the nearby city of Batzra. Batzra is going to be close to Eretz Yisrael, but outside the legal boundaries, says the Haredim. And the Gemara says that he went and asked Rabbi Yochanan, what is the law with regards to leaving Eretz Yisrael in order to accompany one's mother on the road? And Rabbi Yochanan said to him in response, if it is on account of the danger of the roads that you wish to go, then you may leave Eretz Yisrael to accompany her. In other words, if she's on dangerous roads and you're going to help her out because it's a dangerous road, you can go. That's the first point. Then he continues, says, but if it's only on account of the mitzvah to honor one's father and mother that you wish to go, I do not know whether it is permissible. So he's saying about this that are you allowed to go do this positive mitzvah here for honoring, but at the same time contaminate yourself? He's basically deflecting it because perhaps he doesn't want to answer it. The Gemara continues and says that upon hearing Rabbi Yochanan's reply, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzhak says the matter still needs clarification. So the Haredim points out that Rabbi Yasser's mother was not in any danger, and obviously, there's going to be nothing that's going to stand in the way of saving a life. We're not talking about a pekuach nefesh thing, right? So Gemara says, the Haredim says that indeed it was solely for the sake of honoring her that Rabbi Yasser wished to leave Eretz Yisrael, and the question therefore remained unanswered. So the Gemara is going to continue. Is going to say that he therefore imposed upon Rabbi Yochanan to provide a decisive answer. And eventually Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Yasser, if you have already resolved to leave, you may come back with peace. And Rabbi Elazar heard about Rabbi Yochanan's blessing and said, there is no greater permit than this. So I want to point out that you might have thought that Rabbi Yochanan was being non-committal, but what he's saying is that, if you are inclined to believe that it's permissible, he's basically saying that, look, I cannot prohibit you from leaving Eretz Yisrael, nor can I explicitly allow you to leave, right? And to preclude, giving a definitive answer that, is really a yes or no, he couched it in a term where he's saying, if you've already resolved to leave, you may come back with peace. Okay, but he didn't say, yes, you can just go, or no, you can't go. He was being non-committal, and because again, it's a tough call because he's still becoming Tameh, and he didn't want to sit there and endorse this stuff. So that's why it's a complicated sort of thing. And then there's a final inquiry on the subject, and it says that may a Kohen become Tameh with corpse tuma for the honor of the public. The Gemara shows that this is permissible, and Brisa taught that if a group of people were on the way to perform a mitzvah, and there were two roads that converged at their destination, one of which was distant but tahor, and the other one which was close by but tamei, the law for the Kohen is as follows. It says, if the group was following on the distant tahor road, he must travel on the distant road, but if the group was not traveling on the distant road, he travels on the close tamei road together with the others because of the mitzvah to enhance the honor of the public. So the Haredim says about this that it is respectable for a group to stay together as a single unit without any of the members departing, and as such, the Kohen may accompany the others who have chosen to travel on the tamei road for the sake of honoring, according the honor to the mitzvah performing group. In other words, he's giving honor to the mitzvah group, says the Haredim. And similarly, then a Kohen would be allowed to expose himself to the tumah of foreign lands in order to greet a large group of people that is due to arrive from Eretz Yisrael for the purposes of performing a mitzvah. Now, the Gemara is going to move on, and it's going to say that the Gemara is going to inquire as to the degree of tumah with which a Kohen may contaminate himself in order to honor the public. In other words, is this also going to apply for biblical tumah? So Gemara says that until now we know that the Berechot allows a Kohen to contaminate himself with rabbinic corpse tumah for the sake of honoring the public. But does the Berechot permit apply even where there's a suspicion of biblical corpse tumah? What about that? Now, I want to point out that in Rabbi Yochanan's case, Rabbi Yochanan with Rabbi Yasa was also a case of rabbinic corpse tumah, and he wasn't making a declaration on biblical corpse tumah. And look at how shy he was about giving an answer on that was definitive, and even his final answer is not really a definitive answer because he's trying to hold back on issues of even rabbinic corpse tumah. So for the Kohen, now certainly his answers might have been completely different for biblical corpse tumah. And what about all these other circumstances for biblical corpse tumah? The Gemara is going to answer, and it's going to say that we can resolve the question from that which Rabbi Zera said in the reference of the Brisa, and says that the mitzvah to enhance the honor of the public is so great that it temporarily overrides a negative commandment. And this tells us that the Brisa allows a Kohen to travel a tamei road for the sake of honoring the public, even where there is suspicion of biblical corpse tumah. So again, it's always this case of a positive commandment that's outweighing a negative commandment, and that in this case, the sake of honoring the public, says Rabbi Zera, is going to be a positive commandment that for this period of time is going to outweigh a negative commandment. And you can see the greatness of Jews rushing to go do a mitzvah. And the Gemara is going to talk about another law with respect to the dead. Rabbi Yonah said in the name of Rabbi Yosei the Galilean. This, by the way, Rabbi Yosei the Galilean, that's a Tana, who said in the name of Rabbi Yasa bar Hanina, we may not ask questions of halacha before the coffin of a dead person. So this is going to be another case about mocking the dead. They can't do mitzvahs anymore, and you're not allowed to perform mitzvahs in front of them. So in a way, it's kind of like blasphemy, or actually in Proverbs in 17:5, it says one who mocks a pauper actually is blaspheming Hashem. And therefore, since everyone is obliged to learn Torah and the dead is unable to do it, and you're not supposed to learn in the presence of the dead. And the Sidei Yeshua is saying that it's forbidden not only to ask a halachic question before a dead person, but also to answer one. The Gemara specifies asking because that is how halacha discussion begins. So that's a good point. Like in front of the coffin, you should not be talking about things about normal life like learning. You should be more sensitive and not do that because you're shaming the corpse basically. You're shaming the dead person because he used to learn and now he can't. So the Gemara is going to challenge his teaching and it's going to say, but Rabbi Yochanan asked Rabbi Yanai the following question for the coffin of Rabbi Shmuel bar Yotzadak. And it says that if one consecrates his Olah offering for the fund of the maintenance of the temple, what is the law? And Rabbi Yanai answered him. Thus we see such a discussion is actually going to be permitted. Now, the Haredim points out that the content of Rabbi Yanai's response is not known. So we don't know what he said. Gemara is going to answer. It's going to say that we could say that Rabbi Yochanan or Rabbi Yanai spoke of a matter when he was far from the body, or that they remained outside when the body was being brought into the hall of the synagogue. So in this way, there's actually no disagreement with the Tana. The reason this is brought in is to sort of triangulate and fine-tune where is going to be an acceptable limit to quote-unquote talk Torah in front of a corpse now, or in front of the coffin. So we know that it's normally we are going to go eulogize him in a synagogue. And so if they were talking outside of the synagogue, then even if they're relatively close, it marks a different makom, so to speak. They're totally separated with another area. So that's a fine point. It wants to limit to not just say like something that, or not just to limit, but it's and presumably Rabbi Yosef the Galilean would also agree with that it's not an open-ended thing, that there is a limit, and so that even if they're relatively close, but they're in a different building, then that would be permissible. The Gemara is gonna continue. It's gonna say, but Rabbi Yermia asked a halachic question of Rabbi Zera before the coffin of Rabbi Yitzhak bar Rav Shmuel bar Yitzhak, and the Gemara is gonna answer. It's going to say, but we could say that when Rabbi Zera was far from the body, he answered him. And when he was near the body, he did not answer him. So again, these are fine points in the law. And this is here to show you halachic things. That if you're very close to the corpse, you're not doing it, assuming that you're not in a different building. In the case of Rabbi Yochanan, even if he were kind of close, but he's outside the synagogue hall, and the corpse is inside the synagogue hall, then again, it marks a completely different makom and a different location. And over here, if it was an open area and they were asking and they were far enough away, Rabbi Zera could be talking about it, but when they moved closer, he would not. So these are fine points to that have always been there. But these are addressed so that you can know the technical points of how to do the halacha and how does it work. Because the point given over by the Tana is true, but it doesn't give you enough detail from there. You need the fine points of what the Amorim are showing us here. Of course, Rabbi Yosef, the Tana, would be also doing it the same way because the oral law is always consistent. Now, a further law is going to talk about respect from the dead. And there's a brisa that teaches that the carriers of the coffin are forbidden to wear a sandal, lest a sandal of one of them breaks, and he will thus be prevented from doing the mitzvah. So over here, what's happening is that if somebody stops to tie parts of the sandal, he's going to delay the whole coffin moving part, right? You're trying to move the coffin to the place of burial. So if you're wearing these sandals that can become untied, then you're slowing everybody down, and there's a concern that he's gonna obstruct people. And this is a prohibition for that time when specific people would be appointed to carry the coffin. And nowadays, uh, there's no prohibition against wearing sandals when everyone is participating in carrying the coffin. So another reason is that shoes are made differently today than sandals, and that back then the sandals are liable to break off and fall off, and so again it's trying to show respect for the dead, not to delay his funeral procession. So um, the Gemara is going to conclude with a narrative, and then it's going to finish up chapter 3, and it says that it once happened that Rabbi Zera suddenly stopped speaking and fainted. The people thought that he died, but when they came to try to straighten him, they found him capable of speech. So, in other words, when they started to try to bury him, prepare him for burial, and as they were doing that, it basically revived him. And uh, the Gemara continues and says, they asked him, "What is this? Why did you faint?" And he told them that it is for this purpose that we came here, for the very because of the verse, and it says, "And the living should take it to heart." And this is saying that, uh, you know, Rabbi Zera was basically, he was thinking of the sage's interpretation of that phrase, where it says from Ecclesiastes 7:2, where it says, "It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all man, and the living should take it to heart." And the sages are explaining that, says the Haredim, that a person should take to heart that if he eulogizes others, that when he dies, others eulogize him, and if he buries others, then when he dies, others will bury him. And these are the thoughts that prompted Rabbi Zera to consider his own death. And when he contemplated this great calamity destined to befall him, he fainted. So there's a lot of other explanations about it. Rosh Cirilio says that Rabbi Zera would avoid speech of any kind while accompanying the dead, and on its way to be buried, he would look down the entire time. And when some people asked him a question in an attempt to get him to lift his head, he kept chanting the funeral dirge. This is a story also in Moed Katan, and they would ask him, why did he refuse to answer? And he explained that he had come there for the purpose of lamenting the person's death, and he did not want to divert his attention to anything else. So the story is directly linked, says the Yedei Yeshua, to the law earlier that one should not discuss halachic matters before the dead, and that this kind of talk gives the impression of having diverted the attention from the deceased. And the intervening Beraisa about wearing sandals and that they could break also causes an interruption in the mitzvah, and that's also related to this theme, says the Sedei Yeshua, insofar as the reason why there's an interruption, even if it's only momentary, must be avoided, is that it diverts the attention from the dead. So that's going to conclude chapter 3, Halacha 1.